Joe Biden relied on a number of different communities to get elected, some sort of standard constituencies of the Democratic Party. But for Joe Biden, especially, younger voters were asked to come out in 2020, and many did. And since then, the approval rating that he's had amongst younger voters has really fluctuated, dropping steadily, in the year after his presidency. But the most recent polls show that he seems to be doing better. So, what is working for Joe Biden and the Democrats when it comes to younger voters? What are they interested in when it comes to politics? And how do people who want them to be engaged keep that happening? We're very lucky to be joined by a guest who is an expert on all of this. And so the youngest elected Democrat for Joe Biden, which is that's an awesome thing to be able to say, co-host of iGen Politics, Victor Shi, welcome to the Damage Report.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. And so I'm interested in just getting into it. We're a good portion of the way into Biden's first term. The last year politically has been a pretty eventful one. I mean, we've got a war, we've got inflation, we've got now student debt cancellation and a climate bill. So, what are some of the things that you think are breaking through for younger people, maybe keeping them, interested and invested in politics, and what really hasn't been a factor from your point of view?
Yeah, you framed that question so well. And I think that when we look at the political landscape right now, as you said, there's just so many issues that are affecting American people, but also young people in particular. And if I had to pinpoint maybe the top three issues that are facing young people, I'd say it's climate change, student debt cancellation, also the end of reproductive rights for a lot of young women and women in general. And when you start to see those three things, you really kind of see the perfect political recipe brewing for Democrats, because like you said at the outset, young people really haven't been the strongest supporters of President Biden since the outset of his presidency. But recently, Democrats combined, I think, with the Republicans, kind of moves to restrict abortion rights, to not act on climate change, to not support student debt cancellation, contrasted with the Democratic Party's willingness to act on those issues, I think is a really clear indication for young people that Democrats have our best interests. And I think that's in part why you see a lot of young people now starting to support President Biden in higher numbers. And I think that number is going to grow as we head into the midterm elections. But I think for young people right now, it's all about abortions, it's all about climate change, and it's all about student loan cancellation.
I'm so glad that you brought up the destruction of Roe v. Wade, because I really should have honestly led with that. I'm sort of focusing, I guess, on more of where they've had some accomplishments. And obviously, Joe Biden, he's done a little bit via executive orders in the area of abortion and reproductive rights. You've seen some governors that have been, like Gavin Newsom here in California is trying to set up California as a state where these rights are guaranteed. But yeah, that's obviously something that's going to motivate a lot of activity. And I know that lately, some Republicans, like Marjorie Greene, has been out front saying the Republicans aren't trying to do anything more. Don't be scared, voters. And meanwhile, Lindsey Graham has a bill that would ban it at 15 weeks nationally. A number of candidates are encouraging that. States are banning it. And so you seem to think that this is one of the things that's going to help organize the midterms. Are you thinking that it's going to lead to a significant rise in actual participation? Have you been looking at the polls to see how this is affecting people's likelihood of voting and what they think about the election?
I do think that's the case, because if you look at what happened after Dobbs, especially among young people and what young people did, you can see this in the Kansas special election that happened about a month ago. But right after Dobbs, what I thought was really striking was a lot of young people, a lot of my peers. So I'm currently at school at UCLA, and I thought it would be a very political school. People would be talking about politics a lot, but none of my peers really talked about it that much until after the Dobbs decision came out that overturned Roe v. Wade. They took to social media, they posted online, and they actually registered to vote. And I think you saw that happen in Kansas, where a lot of the special, I guess, what was on the ballot, the question about abortion was really driven by women and young people. You're seeing this in Texas, where the majority of young people are registering to vote and driving the voter registration numbers. And so I think that you're seeing this kind of question about abortion really become front and center for young people. And I think it's pretty salient for young people, because this is a right that we grew up with. And so we literally saw the Supreme Court take this right away from us. And kind of going off your point, with Lindsey Graham now and with Marjorie Taylor Greene and with other Republicans, we are now hearing them saying out loud what they intend to do. And I think young people are paying attention to that. And more importantly, I think what young people realize is that this isn't the end game for Republicans. As bad as abortion is, we saw Brian Kemp during the time of this recording moments ago. He announced that he would be supportive of a nationwide ban on contraception. And so there's so much more to this than abortion. I think young people really realize that, and it affects young people a lot because it's young people who really have to face the brunt of these decisions.
100%. Okay, I'm definitely gonna have to look up that Brian Kemp thing because that's amazing. And yeah, these young people probably just took it for granted that it has always been a right that they've had. It could never be taken away. And the people who are doing the taking away are multiple generations away from them, which must make it feel like even more of an injustice. Okay, so you've identified some of the things that are, gaining the interest of younger voters. Are there any misconceptions about either Gen Z or, just generally younger voters, like things that either politicians or people in the media think are important to them or think about how they interface with politics that in your experience is not actually accurate?
Yeah, so I think that there are a lot of misconceptions about Generation Z, in particular in terms of, I think, how we operate as just, I guess, voters. I think there's good merit in terms of just young people regularly, I guess, historically not turning out to vote. But what you see Gen Z doing, I think that's differently, is that starting in 2018, we really kind of showed up to the ballot box in higher numbers, and we kind of broke this myth that it's young people who are staying at home who aren't turning out to vote. And I think you're starting to see that really change. And elected officials, I think, have responded to that. You saw that in 2020, where then candidate Joe Biden, as well as then candidates for Senate, Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, they really honed in on the young person support and the young person base because they realize that we do turn out to vote and that we do actually feel engaged and compelled to make our voices heard at the ballot box. And so I think that you're starting to see that really change. And that's something that elected officials and I think just kind of Americans in general who don't identify as Gen Z kind of look at us and think of us as just snowflakes or people who really kind of just make our voices heard through protest or through social media. But we really do vote. And I think we're starting to see a lot of that happening. And I think 2022 is going to be a big indication of young people turning out to the ballot box and voting in much higher numbers.
I am definitely going to be watching. I mean, we know the historic pattern of midterms that for the president's party, it doesn't tend to go well. Maybe young voters can help to stop that or at least minimize the damage of that. I want to talk about one other aspect of Joe Biden as a candidate is not someone that like he won the presidency and he won the primaries. Obviously, there are people that support him, but because he's older and his support tends to be older, he's not someone that there's ever really been a constituency online for, like enthusiastic support for him. And of course, over the last month or so, there's been the rise of the Dark Brandon meme, sort of like fantasizing about this stronger, bold, virile Joe Biden that will get things done. What do you make of that? Do you see that lasting? Is that something that theoretically could help him connect with younger voters?
Whoever came up with the Dark Brandon meme, I thought was genius because it's still lasting. I mean, I think memes are one of the best way to reach young people and just a different kind of medium of communication. But kind of going off your point, I don't know whether or not Dark Brandon will stay. I think young people definitely have an appetite for the Dark Brandon meme. But what I think you're starting to see Democrats, and especially the administration, do that's different in terms of how they outreach to young people is I think they realize that the messenger really matters. And kind of going off your point where President Biden may not be the most effective messenger, people see him as kind of older, people see him as just not really relatable. And so what you're starting to see with the administration is they're bringing in a lot of digital creators and digital content creators. I had a ton of friends this past week who were at the Inflation Reduction Act celebration 4 weeks after the signing. And the White House had a dedicated session with young digital content creators to get the message across. So when someone posts on TikTok or Instagram, it's young people who see it. They find it more relatable when it comes from our generation. And so I think you're starting to see that change in terms of how President Biden and Democrats feel like they can outreach to young people. And you also saw that with, for example, this group called BTS, which is a Korean kind of really famous, I guess, band group that went to the White House, and young people really got really enthusiastic about that. And so I think they're starting to realize that President Biden may not be the most effective messenger, and that it's really going to be young people and young activists and young organizers who are going to push that message across the finish line for young people.
100%. Yeah, there was some, like, I think young actress who came and did something at the White House a few months back, and the right got so salty about it that he's using the fact that while these people, like, I don't know if BTS are like big fans of Joe Biden, but they probably prefer the nature of the US government right now. That's something that Biden can use. He may not be the person who's most exciting, but he'll have supporters who are. And so I think it's wise for him to use that, even weaponize it. Finally, though, I want to give you a chance to talk about the podcast. So, iGen Politics. What would you consider your beat? What's your objective with the podcast, and what do you do with it?
Yeah, so it's a podcast that I co-host with Jill Banks, who kind of represents the generation from the 70s. And the whole premise of the podcast, iGen, it stands for kind of intergenerational politics. And the whole point is with someone like her from the 70s and with someone like me representing Gen Z, that we can come together and really kind of talk about politics and kind of transcend that generational difference. Because both her and I recognize, and I think a lot of people are starting to recognize, that to save democracy, to preserve democracy, to make sure that Democrats win and Republicans lose, we have to have that kind of multi-generational, intergenerational coalition coming together and making our voice heard. And so that's what we strive to do. And it's a weekly podcast that interviews people and tries to bring these issues to the forefront.
I like that. I think that's actually a great idea. Often when we think about like diversity and hosting on a podcast, it'll be like, well, we got to have one conservative and one liberal. But no, like different generations are going to come at politics from a very different position, very different life experience. They're going to approach problem solving differently. It sort of reminds me of like Stranger Things. Like you want to have the kids, they'll deal with the Demogorgon in one way, but Hopper's going to do it in a different way. Like you got to hit it from different generations. And so I like that model. So everyone, you can check out iGen Politics. Victor, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. This is so great.